Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify some. When we talked about, or when in my opening statement, that in the past year, over 35,000 elephants and 1,000 rhinoceros have been killed illegally for their tusks and horns, the issue about where we rank is clearly this. Where does the United States rank in terms of a market for ivory? Not talking about illegal, we're just talking about a market. Where are we in terms of that world market?
Mr. Lowenthal, I'm sorry to say that as with any kind of illicit trade, it's very difficult to establish exact dimensions.
We're not talking about illicit trade. We're just talking about market. I believe that we are the market for ivory. The United States ranks second in the world in terms of a market for ivory that's sold. Is that true? Just a moment. We're not talking about illicit. We're just talking about all ivory.
I can't confirm that we are second. I can confirm that we are a very major market for
I can confirm that we are second, Mr. Dreyer. I can confirm that. Let me go back and talk about why, and just the understanding of what the underlying problem, because that's really why we're here. We're not really here just to talk about although there's some of the things that have occurred in the 1-year ban of ivory, sports elephants from Tanzania and Zimbabwe. In the 1800s, let's just remember, ladies' hats were made of feathers. They were made of eagles, hawks, and herons. They were very popular, so popular that their desire or their market almost wiped out populations of migratory birds in the Western Hemisphere. In 1918, this Congress passed the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, or MBTA, which implemented a strict ban on the trade of migratory birds. Populations of these species have rebounded, and there's no demand today for these feathered hats. Why do you think that MBTA and similar laws like the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act have been so effective? And do you think it's time to bring protections for African elephants more in line with the protections that we provide now for migratory birds?
I think it is certainly true that the conservation laws that were enacted to protect migratory birds have been enormously successful. They've been successful both in immediately restricting trade in wildlife that was decimating the populations of migratory birds. They've also been successful, I think, in creating long-term changes in popular culture and taste. We no longer see ladies' hats that are of the same, even with artificial bird feathers and that sort of thing. I think that is one of the things that we can attempt to do here, is to try to both be vigilant in trying to crack down on the illicit trade in ivory. We can also attempt to send a message that commercialization of wildlife that leads to its extinction is not acceptable. And that, I think, is certainly a message that we are trying to send here. We crushed ivory, for example, at the ivory crush out in Denver, 6 tons of ivory that had been taken as illegal imports by law enforcement officials. We crushed that ivory to send a very clear signal that the ivory was not meant to be seen as items of value. It was meant to be seen as evidence of the destruction of wildlife.
You know, the question is also, it's been raised that these are onerous regulations. I'd just like to clarify that isn't it true that the ivory import ban under the African Elephant Conservation Act is stricter than what the administration is proposing now? Isn't it also true that the Endangered Species Act, Section 4D, for African elephant ivory is more lenient than the rules for trading other types of ivory, and that a revision of this rule will still be more flexible for importers of antique ivory than the provisions of the African Elephant Conservation Act? Isn't it true?
That's absolutely true. That the African Elephant Conservation Act moratorium is absolute. We are administering it with some sensitivity and flexibility. We're trying to work closely with stakeholders. The same is true of the prohibitions of the Endangered Species Act that would otherwise apply if it were not for a special rule that we have adopted, and which we are proposing to revise, not rescind, but revise, in order to make it more effective in achieving conservation, but still being sensitive to legitimate owners of ivory and their needs.
Maybe you can tell us then, just in my last question, of how tightening restrictions on domestic ivory trade will help reduce the poaching and trafficking crisis that Africa is facing today.
Well, the major thing driving the poaching is the illegal trade in very high-value artifacts. And it is disguised in this country and elsewhere around the world as legitimate ivory trade, reaching very high value. If we can limit the market and if we can eliminate the ability of the legal trade to cover and to disguise the illegal trade, it'll help us enormously in terms of reducing the market for this ivory and in cutting out the economic incentive for these criminals to kill wildlife. They're not killing elephants because they hate elephants. They're killing elephants because they see them as sources of money. And if we can take the money out of the equation, they will stop killing elephants.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman.